Hello everyone and welcome back to another Wizard 101 video. You may have noticed last video I was very tired. Very tired. But today I've decided that I'm going to record later at night instead of very early in the morning, so I'm not physically exhausted. I had to re-record that video about 30 times, which is really funny. I just have a bunch of video files of me messing up the intro every single time. Today's will be better, and today we're going to be going over damage versus crit. Now, you may have noticed I put up a poll on my YouTube channel a day or two ago saying damage versus crit, what do you prefer? The results obviously were heavily in favor of damage, which makes sense. Damage was 83% of the votes, and crit was 17% of the votes. It was about 1.5 thousand votes, so you can kind of go from there, see what you can see what the overwhelming opinion is. Now, I'm going to go over today the benefits of both, what I personally think, and whether I agree with the poll. So, let's get into it. Damage versus crit, what is better? Well, let's first talk about damage. Damage's most major upside, compared to crit, is the fact that it upgrades the base damage of your spell. Every single time you cast a spell, it is going to have a guaranteed plus that percentage more damage. Also, the best part about damage is that it's factored in right at the start, so your spells will always consistently do a lot of damage based on how much damage you have. So, for example, if you have 100% damage, that means this Ship of Fools that does 275 will do, 550, which means that it's guaranteed to do that every single time. Obviously, with an enchant, that gets even bigger. This goes to like 500, and then it'll do a guaranteed 1000, which is really good. And obviously, that's only at 100% damage. Nowadays, the average damage is 150 plus, which is really good. So, damage definitely is good. The downside, I would say, is that it is not as powerful as crit. Crit is good because it is extremely powerful, and it will amplify your spells by quite a bit, a multiplier rather than a percent increase, which can make it quite a bit better in regard to actually doing more damage than flat damage. Now let's talk about crit. As I just said, it amplifies the damage. It goes anywhere from 1.3 times around that to about 2 times damage, and this has to do with the amount of crit you have compared to the amount of crit an enemy has. So, say you only had 100 crit versus the enemy's 100 block or whatever. That means you're not going to be doing very much damage with that crit, maybe 1.2 times to 1.3 times a multiplier. So it's an extra bit of damage on your spell, but not a great deal amount. If you have 700 crit versus an enemy with 100 crit block, well, you're going to be doing almost a full 2 times multiplier. You can actually see this when you hover over a spell in battle. It will say it right at the top of the screen. It will say the percent chance you have to crit and the multiplier. The downsides of crit, and to me these are the biggest downsides, is one, enemies will have varying crit blocks, so there is, first off, a chance you might not even crit. Second, the chance of you actually doing the full 2 times crit is very low. I don't think I've done a full 2 times crit on an enemy in a very long time. If you look here with my death, you can see when I hover over it, it says it right at the top. Okay, I can actually do full 2 times to these enemies because I have 500 crit. They probably have barely any crit block. I mean, it says right here they have 0% crit block, which means I will crit 95% of the time, as that said, and it will be a 2 times multiplier. Now, let's talk about my opinions on crit versus damage, because a lot of people like to do crit builds, a lot of people like to do damage builds, and back in the day it was very popular to do a crit build, and a lot of people in the comments of that poll said, I prefer crit because I like the massive extra damage it gives. Well, let me tell you my opinion on what I think. First off, I'm gonna say it, damage is hands down better, and the reason for this is that damage increases the base amount of damage your spell does, and a lot of times critting will be random. The chance of you critting is actually pretty low, which means more often than not you're actually not going to be critting, which is why I personally think damage is really good, because even if you don't actually get a crit, you still do quite a bit of damage. I think this is consistently my favorite strategy, and my level 100s I've quested up recently had a damage build rather than an actual crit build. You can see here, you can see they have around 100 damage and they only have about 100 crit, and this is the same with my myth on the other account. So let's talk about my opinion on critting and why I don't think it's nearly as important. First and foremost, critting is extremely easy to do. For example, my Fire and Myth with a 100 crit, they aren't even in the 200 range, crits 90% of times against enemies in Chrysalis. This is really important because if I crit that much against enemies in Chrysalis, there's almost really no point to get a super high amount of crit when you can really be focusing on damage. Now, obviously, I don't have the full 2x multiplier, but I don't really care about that. I would need to sacrifice a lot of damage for that multiplier to the point where it would probably even out, and I would only have, like, say, obviously I haven't farmed for gear yet, but say I had 120 damage, right? Which is around average at this level. If I had 120 damage and say only 300 crit, to actually get more than 300 crit and to get the 2x multiplier on against Arc 3 enemies, I would have to sacrifice maybe 20 to 30 damage for that extra 200 crit. So for example, say I decided to do the Halloween wand, gave myself an extra 200 crit, got up to 500. Well, that's good and all, but I just sacrificed 10% damage, and I still probably wouldn't end up doing the full 2x multiplier. In my opinion, it's just not worth the loss of damage that you're actually getting. Now, I would like to say, obviously it's up to your opinion, but I highly recommend that you focus on damage gear and not crit gear. It's just not important, especially at a low level now. It is not important to focus on crit because crit is directly based on your level as well. What this means is that, say you're level 40, you're only going to have a 40% chance to crit no matter how much crit rating you have. So what this means is especially from levels, say 1 to 80, don't focus on crit. There's literally 0 point. I don't recommend it at all, and if you are, I would definitely recommend you change back. This 100% damage here will help you so much more than critting than getting a lot of crit rating. Now, you guys can disagree with me in the comments. Let me know what your opinions are. Obviously, I think a vast majority will agree with me, considering that poll I did, as I said, was 83% damage. But this is my opinion on why I think damage is more important than crit. And I will say, hands down, I do think it's more important than crit. So thank you all for watching. Make sure to drop a like at the sub button, and go support me financially on Patreon if you wish. You can also join my Discord server, link in description, and hang out there. So thank you all for watching. I will see you in the next video. Adios.